Howdy folks, and welcome back to the channel. Now, it's been a little while since I've done one of my Thursdoid summaries, and that's because the Thursdoids were pushed back to monthly rather than the previous bi-weekly schedule. But as of the 19th of October 2023, we've had a new update posted, and let me tell you, it's a thick boy. So if you're unfamiliar with these videos, basically I'll be covering everything you need to know from the blog post the developers posted, which is linked in the description if you want to give it a full read, as well as trying to make things a little bit more digestible in places where it gets technical. If you enjoy the video or get something useful from it, be sure to drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for more Project Zomboid videos just like this one. So let's get into it. There's quite a hefty focus on the upcoming and much anticipated crafting overhaul in this blog post, and rightfully so, because it seems like there's a bunch of new features on the way. But to give all of that context, the developers start off by recapping the crafting overhaul, what it is exactly, and what their main goals were with this system. Now, I'm going to try and condense this section down a bit because it's very wordy, and I'm going to put a timestamp in this video just after this section as well, for anyone that already feels like they are familiar with it. The devs kick off by stating that the expansive infrastructure of this crafting overhaul has already been merged with the development build, and the rest of the team have started working on various bits and pieces. Stuff like post-apocalyptic professions, tech trees, workstations, and expanded crafting possibilities. They then recap all of the major goals of this crafting system, and this is where I'll condense things down. But feel free to give it a read in full if you want to, via the link in the description. The first goal here is to provide Project Zomboid with a more feature-rich endgame. Anyone that's played Project Zomboid for an extended period will likely know what the devs are referring to here. We have tons of goals in the early game, a lot to keep us playing and feeling like we have something to shoot for. But once you've got a safe house and you're all set for the power and water going out, well, that's when the game starts lagging a bit in terms of objectives. Suddenly you feel a little bit aimless. In the developers' words, they say, and I quote, "We want to provide many more objectives a settled survivor can undertake to improve their safe house or indeed a community of players. More things to build, more opportunities to craft, more ways to be creative." So that's straightforward enough, but definitely a major reason the crafting overhaul is occurring that I think many players would probably agree with the reasoning for. The next goal is to provide a way for servers to be able to run indefinitely without the need to wipe or respawn loot. Now, this is a big one for me since we run our own server, and I can't tell you how true this actually is. You might not realize it if you've not gotten very invested in a server or community before, but we have to do this a lot. Our servers run monthly wipes, for example, whereas other servers essentially reset chunks of the map to set them back to their starting state in order to respawn loot, vehicles, and furnishings. Either way, it's a pretty big task, and also something that sort of takes away from the immersive experience, I guess. The developers say that they want to use the new crafting overhaul to give players more reason to play further into the apocalypse and provide an entirely different feeling to the early stages of the game at the same time. The next objective of the crafting overhaul is to provide believable post-apocalyptic professions that would emerge in a post-technical, post-apocalyptic society. As the devs say in their blog, if it's been 30 years or so since the outbreak, it doesn't make much sense for someone to make a new character that's a burger flipper. As time goes by, the goal is to gradually retire pre-apocalypse professions and replace them with post-apocalypse options. We've seen some mods that have tried to replicate this idea in the past, so it'll be cool to see how this transpires in the vanilla version of the game. The next goal on the developers' list with the crafting overhaul is, and I quote, "to provide more community cooperation in multiplayer and NPCs in Build 43 and beyond, with different interacting professions that can contribute to a community, as well as provide much more extensive crafting and building, encouraging trade, and other interesting player interactions." Now that's quite a mouthful for that one, but I don't think it requires much more explanation. Essentially, they want players to be able to utilize different skills in a way that interacts with one another and complements other players' acquired skills to accomplish common goals. Almost at the end of the recap now, with the next goal being, and I quote once more here, "to provide a framework for players who want to focus more on community building and player interactions than zombie survival, so that they can can optionally run servers with a more traditional wilderness map-based survival game or extensive tech mods. The developers then basically elaborate by explaining whilst the focus is on the vanilla version of the game, they want to provide a solid foundation for players to turn the game into something of their own making in a variety of survival settings with the use of mods. This leads nicely into the final objective, which is to let the modders be all they can be, as they put it. Essentially, give them the tools to take the crafting system above and beyond in all kinds of different directions when it comes to the crafting system itself. So I know that was a bit lengthy, which is why I wanted to try and timestamp that section, but important for those of you who might not be so familiar with the crafting overhaul and its primary aims. Now, we're on to the good bit, which is the new stuff. The devs kick off this section by introducing blacksmithing. We've had a look at some forging in the past, and I'll make sure some of that footage is playing now, but this is a bit more of a detailed look with screenshots detailing particular processes and what certain workbenches associated with blacksmithing can be used for. The devs say that the initial work here has been based on providing the ability for someone living in the wild to make use of this skill with a primitive furnace and forge, which are constructed with rocks, clay, and other gatherable materials, as well as higher tiers producible later on as players level the skill. They go on to say that there will be modern equivalents of these workstations available within the world map for players to use, but that they are filling out the tech trees from the very bottom first and building outwards. They assume that players do not have access to any looted supplies at all and go from there. They also note that whilst these images shown have context menus, they are hoping to move away from the right-click options for these practices, much like they are in other areas of the game. Iron products like nails can be produced, and we see a whole list of craftable items in some of the images, such as hammers, axes, and even sledgehammers. It's really cool to see some of this stuff for me personally. I love taking on primitive survival playthroughs on map mods that emulate the wilderness, and I know I'm not the only one to do so either. The devs then move on to showcasing what they refer to as the second tier, with a proper anvil and a quenching bucket. They note that this is meant to be more of a medievalish look than the previous tier. More complex and durable tools are craftable at this tier, and they lastly show off a dome kiln used for producing coke from charcoal, which is then used in the creation of steel. They note that wood charcoal will be incredibly important for many of the crafting trees. Moving away from blacksmithing, we're then given a video clip showing just under 4 minutes of footage relating to pottery and stoneworking. Now, this is the first bit of masonry I think we've seen in any blog post just yet, and the part that really takes my attention here is the construction of brick walls. The developers also note that there are two variations for this: stone or clay brick walls. The extended building options from these systems will allow for paths, roofs, and decorative elements for player-built communities to really feel like a settlement, according to the developers. They will naturally provide more security than their wooden counterparts too, which the devs note they may need to do some balancing with on their part. All the same, really cool to see some of the crafting system being fleshed out, and you can start to really see how it's all coming together at this stage. Last of the post-apocalyptic skills for this dev blog, we get to look at some actions that will come under the sphere of influence of the brewer profession. Another 4-minute plus video for this section too, prefaced by the devs saying they are aware alcohol doesn't serve too much of a purpose right now, but that they are providing more benefits and downsides to partaking in alcoholic beverages with Build 42. In the video clip attached to this segment, we see a survivor using mash barrels to create cloudy corn wine, and interestingly, when one of these barrels are left too long with the ingredients inside, it creates vinegar, which is then repurposed into creating pickled eggs in a jar. Stuff like this will be fantastic for long-term survival, providing more alternative options outside of just using refrigeration, especially if we're talking about going years into the apocalypse. So moving away from crafting and post-apocalyptic professions, we get into a part of the dev blog I was really excited about, which is basements. As a recap for those unaware, these basements will either be permanent fixtures that will always be attached to certain locations or places of interest on the map, or they'll be pulled from a randomly selected pool of basements that you'd find more regularly attached to everyday buildings. Now, for the latter of those two options, the developers state in this blog that they have 190 19 of these currently designed and ready to go. Some are empty ones and others are filled with loot with various stages in between. We're then shown a purposely fuzzed up image of some of these variants as a teaser. The devs remind us that there will be basements, bunkers, panic rooms, and I quote here, Wayne's World sets that we can find. The frequency of their spawn rates will be determined in the sandbox settings. They show us about a minute and a half of new footage showing some of the basement designs, with a disclaimer that this is still a work in progress at this stage. Some of the basements are in a lot better shape than others, showing scenes like LAN party computer setups all the way to apocalypse survival bunkers. Awesome stuff. Next up, we're taking a look at the new and improved mod selection menu. This is something that's really important to me as a content creator that uses a bunch of different mods and has to filter through a huge list of options every time I want to select stuff for a video, and I'm sure a lot of you folks that are sick of scrolling through mod lists trying to find that one you're after will be in the same boat. This is the first bit of footage we've seen of the new system in use, and we see things like being able to determine a particular load order for your mods to reduce compatibility issues, being able to share your presets with other players to make things easier for everyone, and advanced tags and search options. All of this is going to be a huge improvement on the current setup for a game that has a massive population of players already using mods in abundance. The next section of the blog post goes back to some more world design, and this time we're looking at looted homes. If you've ever played Project Zomboid before, you might have been surprised when you were told that the outbreak is already 7 days in, at least in vanilla. In most areas, it certainly doesn't look like riots or looting have occurred. Everything is just kind of how it would be in day-to-day life, right? Well, this is something the devs feel they can improve on and want to tell a bit more of a story about what happened in the world during the outbreak itself. And with that, we're given yet more footage of a survivor exploring ransacked shops and looted homes that will be making their way into the game. The idea being that this will be just one more element of the game that will help sell that feeling that chaos unraveled just before you arrived. We're then shown some new items like the military manpack radio, which works when worn on the character's back, and various new fluid containers like flasks of whiskey, hydration backpacks, and canteens. There's also a picture of some backpack sprayers that contain fluid, which the devs state are going to be useful for farming. Not only that though, the devs then say that these backpacks got them thinking about flamethrowers. Yes, you heard that right, flamethrowers. They do mention that this will need to come after they've had some time to get back into the fire rework that was mentioned a little while ago though. So we're almost at the end of the blog post now, and the devs basically are wrapping up everything else that has been going on with the team recently, letting us know that the sound team have hit an impressive milestone, hitting a total of 50 music tracks that have been rewritten so they can work with Build 42's new dynamic music system. So that's pretty neat. As if we hadn't already had enough footage this Thursdoid, the developers introduced some of their new cleaning systems. A huge part of Project Zomboid is designing your own base, and in Build 42, the developers want to allow players to wash away and scrub all sorts of stuff out of our chosen houses. Whether it's blood, grime, or graffiti, we'll be able to use different tools and liquids to remove these from our walls and do our best impressions of House Flipper in Project Zomboid. I'm sure this will be awesome news for the avid homebody that loves nothing more but to make their safe house a home. Before the devs wrap this one up though, they stay on trend with the development studios posting stuff for spooky season and show us some deer that have seemingly taken on a rather drastic dietary plan. Oh dear indeed. So that's it from me in this one folks. As always, there's a link to the blog post in full in the description, and if there's anything you want to talk about from this dev blog, post it down in the comments. I always love interacting with you guys about upcoming features, so yeah, I look forward to hearing from you and what we've seen in this one, and as always, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for helping me to do what I do best, for joining me on our whitelisted Project Zomboid server, and taking part in special events and themed wipes that we host there. Link in the description if you want to join them. Thanks folks, and I'll see you all in the next one.